I'm glad to be with you again. Today I'm going to talk about study skills, and I'm specifically going to talk about critical thinking and research skills. So, I'm Amy Dietzman. I think some of you might have attended my other study skills presentation that I did a few weeks ago. For those who didn't, just so you know a little bit about me, I used to be a high school English teacher, and then I started teaching college. And for the past 4 years, I've been teaching education psychology courses for Arizona State University. And I work full time as the learning and design manager for tutor.com. In this presentation, we're actually going to talk about what critical thinking is and how we can be critical thinkers. This is going to lead us into how we can be good writers. And we're going to talk about finding sources for our research. I'm going to give you some tips about doing that and identifying assumptions and biases and how they can influence our research. And we all are also going to talk about the all important subject, which is plagiarism and academic integrity, which are really important things for you to know and understand, especially before you head off to college. And now you might be thinking a couple of times during this presentation that I'm talking a lot about politics, but I want to assure you that while you can draw parallels between what's going on in the world and elections and political issues and what I'm talking about, we're really talking about things that remain relevant no matter what's going on in the world. It's all about how you find and analyze sources and how you determine your own thought processes when you're looking at research. So let's talk about critical thinking. Critical thinking is the objective analysis and evaluation of facts to form a judgment. Let's pull that apart a little bit. Important words here are analysis and evaluation of facts. A lot of people think it is in our nature to think critically, but the truth is that most of us tend to believe things we hear and see without always thinking about what's true. Much of our thinking left to itself is biased, distorted, partial, sometimes uninformed, sometimes prejudiced. Yet the quality of our life and what we produce in terms of schoolwork or whatever else you do in your life depends precisely on the quality of your thought. Excellence in thought, however, must be systematically cultivated or built. If you've ever heard of something called a growth mindset, it's a lot about believing that you can actually get smarter no matter how old you are. And that's why it's important to be educated and to conduct your own research. Not just when you have to write a research paper, but when you want to get accurate information about anything. So, what does it take to be a critical thinker? Now, these are all reasons to think critically in our everyday lives, but how does critical thinking lead us to be better students and better writers? A critical thinker raises vital questions and problems. A critical thinker gathers and assesses relevant information. A critical thinker effectively comes to well reasoned conclusions and solutions. A critical thinker thinks open mindedly within alternative systems of thought. A critical thinker recognizes and assesses assumptions and implications and practical consequences. And a critical thinker communicates effectively with others. So, have you ever had a debate with someone who is really well read and informed, and maybe they're just so smart? And maybe you immediately realized you were out of your league with this person because you thought you knew a lot until you started talking to them, and then you realized you really didn't. You might notice that this kind of person is really open to talking and wants to hear your perspective. What made that person a critical thinker? Alternatively, have you ever had a debate or an argument with someone who just bases everything they say on hearsay? This person said that, and I heard over here about this, and that person becomes really emotional. You could probably say exactly what that person was missing in terms of critical thinking and clarity in their thought process. You may have noticed that this person was not very open to hearing your opinion and was probably not a good communicator. You've probably also had a conversation with a know it all who just won't listen to anyone because they know it all. Where does this person fall in the scale of critical thinking? And where do you want to fall? Part of being a critical thinker is knowing your own assumptions. I'll admit that in this day and age, I've seen things on the news before and I've thought, really? Did that really happen? And my instinct is to believe it. But I have to remind myself to go to to the internet and look for evidence or proof. Are there pictures? Is there a video? Who else is saying the same thing? Now, we have to be careful when we look up videos because sometimes we find sound bites. And that means that somebody edited a video and now we're not really getting the whole picture. We're hearing just a little bit of what someone said or just partial bit of someone's speech. And that isn't always the whole picture and the whole story because we don't know the context around the whole discussion. Identifying our assumptions is a first step to knowing what baggage we are carrying into our research. Sometimes we can have assumptions about things and we don't even realize it. So, when I was in college, I did a speech on the glass ceiling and how women don't make the same amount of money as men doing the same jobs. Now, I did this a long time ago because I'm kind of old, but you've probably heard this same thing. This has been around a long time. It's an old issue. But at the time, I thought I was really finding some groundbreaking stuff. I was so passionate about it. I remember literally sitting in a library researching this presentation, and I thought I had it nailed. I was going to get an A plus. But my professor hated it. She said my presentation was completely biased and not objective. I remember thinking, how does this woman not like my speech about women? And I think I ended up getting a low C and I was devastated. But what my professor was trying to teach me was to present my facts objectively and without bias. Maybe if my assignment had been about trying to persuade my audience, it would have been okay. But that's not what the assignment was. It was an argument. Presenting an argument is not the same thing as persuasion. So, an argument is based on facts and usually presents both sides, and persuasion is about your personal opinion and usually is one sided. There is a time and place for persuasion, but beware, it's not used as often as an argument would be. As critical thinkers, we need to identify and evaluate our own assumptions before we accept something as truth. We need to follow an argument to its conclusion. I think of how sometimes I read a headline for a news story and I don't read the whole article. Sometimes the headline is deceiving. Sometimes it's attention getting. Sometimes it's not even what the article is about. We need to follow an argument to its conclusion. And so that means we read the whole article and maybe even read others that are like it. Spot contradictions and faulty logic. Now, this means that we can see when things don't really add up. So I'll give you an example. There was a recent article out of CNN that read, adults with COVID-19 about twice as likely to say they have dined at a restaurant. Now, maybe you've heard this before. Correlation is not the same as causation. What this means is that people aren't necessarily getting COVID at restaurants. But it could mean that adults who admit to eating out at restaurants are also a little more relaxed in their overall feelings about COVID. And maybe they don't take the same precautions, or maybe they take more risks than others who don't eat out at restaurants. So there is a correlation between COVID and people who eat out at restaurants. But eating out at restaurants doesn't necessarily cause COVID. So when we read, we have to stop and think about contradictions and logic. And critical thinkers also draw appropriate distinctions. They avoid extremes and they exercise foresight. And foresight is the ability to look ahead and consider future possibilities. Bias prevents you from being objective. You need to present factual information and informed assertions that are supported with credible evidence. So now that I gave you this whole thing about critical thinking and biases and assumptions, let's talk about how you actually apply it to whatever you might be working on. A research paper, maybe you're getting ready for some kind of AP exam, maybe you're writing a presentation that you have to give. So avoiding bias means that we need to write in the third person. Almost always. Unless the assignment specifically says it's some kind of a reflection, you should always write in the third person. Avoid using the word I, because I now puts you into the situation. Avoid using the word you because now you sound like you're preaching or you're writing a self help book. Avoid your personal feelings and be specific. If there is a statistic that you can use, then use it. Don't say things like a lot or most or an alarming number of people if you can put a number on that. And use people first language, meaning don't say the disabled woman. The woman with a disability is people first. She's a woman first. Her disability is not the definition of her. And just over the past few years, you probably know this, gender neutral phrases are more acceptable. It's preferable to use they and them rather than he, she, her, him. And that used to be grammatically incorrect, but it isn't anymore. These are some examples of bias statements. The disabled boy enrolled in the geography class. It's better to say the boy with vision impairment enrolled in the geography class. Or all reporters report accurately on the news. Most reporters do their best to report accurately on the news. Precision is essential in scholarly writing. When you refer to a person or persons, choose words that are accurate, clear, and free from bias. Bias, like inaccurate or unclear language, can be a form of imprecision. For example, using man to refer to all human beings is not as accurate as using the term individuals or people or persons. My mom told my sister and I a story just recently about a cousin of ours who's a girl, and my mom said she was becoming a fireman. We laughed and told my mom, I think you mean firefighter. And that's okay. My mom's 76 years old, and we can give her a pass. She didn't use the right word, but we should try to adjust our language to avoid bias whenever we can. Being informed means reading all the perspectives, even when you don't like them. It means looking at what may not be popular to you and what may not be interesting to reach the kind of conclusions you need to reach. If you've been given an assignment and the instructor has provided you with several articles to read, then that's good. Read those articles, but maybe do your own research and read articles that the instructor didn't give you. I know that sounds crazy. You're probably thinking, why would I give myself more work? But it's always good to gather your own information to ensure that you're getting the full picture. It's a good idea to read. It just is. You'll never say to yourself, why did I read so much and conduct my own research and what a waste of time? Probably not, because your grades are always going to look better if you do more. So where do you find credible sources for your research? Many libraries, schools, and universities have electronic databases. Look for a database link on your local library or your school website. You can also look through, this is something I recently learned, the New York Times archives. That's where you can find a lot of historical sources. Use primary sources, meaning use the original document and not someone else's summary of it. If you read someone else's summary of something and you think, oh, that's really good information, then go find that original source. And look at the domain suffix. This means if it's a .edu, a .gov, or a .org, in general, these are reliable sources on the web. However, beware of political sites used to sway your opinion. And use these sites with caution. Check for credibility and authority. Company websites generally end in .com. And these sites are great for information about a particular company, but beware, company websites are used to promote something. So be sure the information is non-biased. And while many professional organizations end in .org, there are also many .orgs that are biased and promote a specific agenda. So just be sure that when you're looking for information and you're using websites, you're putting your critical thinking cap on and you're reading these sources with a focus on what might be biased. Also, you can use Wikipedia in a more awesome way. Over the years, Wikipedia has become more reliable as a general source of information because it has a large audience of readers and it has a rigorous editorial guidelines now, but it used to not. So a lot of teachers and educators don't want you to use that. So if you can't use Wikipedia as a source, you can still use it by scrolling all the way down to the references at the bottom of the entry. And that is where you will find a list of resources related to your topic. And then there's a lot of times links to those resources. So Wikipedia is a good place to start, actually. And this is true of any resource. If you find a good article, go to its references page and see if you can find additional articles for your topic. And use the titles, the journal titles, or the author to search for those in your online library. You can also use Google Scholar. It's a great database of research-based materials. And then also remember to check the dates of your sources. If you're citing materials that are more than 5 or 10 years old, probably they are no longer credible. The reason is more research has been done since then. The world has changed, issues have changed. The only time, of course, that's not true is if you're using a primary source, like the Declaration of Independence is always a good primary source. And then examine the author's credentials. If you're not sure whether the author is credible, look them up and see what they do. And then go with your instincts. Sources that are probably not credible are opinion or op-ed pieces and editorials. If you notice all caps and exclamation points, it's probably not credible. Or if the website seems primitive, meaning old-fashioned, and not professional, it's probably not. And this is a joke, but I used to tell my high school students, if it's called Tom's website, it's not credible. If an article is just a paragraph, it's also probably not credible. And if you sense there is persuasion, someone is trying to convince you of something, even if it's not outwardly called an editorial, it probably still is. And remember the big picture. Sometimes when we are reading articles for research, we get narrowly focused on issues within issues. It's like if you've ever heard of going down a rabbit hole. Remember the larger issue at hand and keep perspective. So let's talk about how you find the right research. You know you need to write a paper about, let's say, the author Toni Morrison, and you go to Google Scholar or your online library and you type in Toni Morrison, and you come up with all of these reviews of her books and a whole lot of articles that just don't really fit your paper. You also come up with some weird articles that just have the word Toni and other articles about Van Morrison. And so you put quotes around Toni Morrison. That'll help your search to put those two words together. And now you're going to do something called a Boolean search. Boolean searches allow you to combine words and phrases using words like and, or, and not. That helps you to limit, broaden, or define your search. So let's say you're still looking up Toni Morrison and you add the word and Nobel Prize in quotes. Now you've narrowed down your search to include only articles about Toni Morrison and the Nobel Prize. It's gotten really narrow though. Now you've only found 4 articles and none of them are all that good. So you need to find more. So you search Toni Morrison again and you use the word or Alice Walker, another author. Now you're going to get a lot of articles about either of these authors. You find some good stuff and you realize that you'd really like to find out a little bit more about this particular book called Beloved. But you don't want to pull anything else up about Toni Morrison because you've got enough about her. So you search Beloved, not Toni Morrison. Now you've got just articles about that book. So searching is a process. It might take you several tries. You might have to try all kinds of different search terms and combinations of terms. You might have to sift through a lot of junk. But the better you get at searching, the less time you'll spend opening up and reading articles that don't fit. So we talked about finding credible sources. Now let's talk about how you use them. After you introduce evidence into your writing or your presentation, you must say why and how this evidence supports your argument. So here's some questions to ask yourself. I've just stated this point. So what? Why is it interesting? Why should anyone care? What does this information imply? What consequences of thinking this way or looking at this problem this way? I've just described what something is like or how I see it, but why is it like that? Why is a really good question to ask yourself to know whether or not your writing is good. I've just said that something happens. So how does it happen? How does it come to be the way it is? Again, how is another really good word. How is this idea related to my thesis? What connections exist between them? Does it support my thesis? If so, how does it do that? Can I give an example to illustrate this point? These are good questions to ask yourself when you're writing to determine where you need to put evidence or research. Every time you draw a conclusion, check that you have evidence to do so. Remember, every claim needs evidence. So, how do you know if you have enough? Well, I usually conduct all of my research before I start to write or plan out my presentation. I like to have the big picture. What do I know? What am I going to say? What are my claims? And how do I back it all up with credible evidence? So if I'm trying to make a claim and I can't find any evidence to support it, well, then I know before I even waste any time writing that I am on the wrong track. This also helps me to check my own biases and my assumptions before I begin the writing process. So once I have all of this clearly defined, then I start to write. I have talked about color coded notes before. I talked about it in my last presentation with you guys, but it's worth repeating. I color code my notes and I do it by paragraph because if I color code things and I suddenly realize that I have nothing left in pink, then I know, my pink paragraph needs more evidence. So let me explain that a little bit more. If my first paragraph is my first claim, I might color code all of my notes for that claim in blue. My second paragraph's notes are all purple, and my notes for my third paragraph might all be pink. And then when I look at my notes, after I've finished all of my research, I can easily see which paragraph needs more work. If I have hardly any pink in my notes, like I said before, then I know I don't have enough evidence to support the claim in my third paragraph. I'll show you an example of my notes in just a second. Here's a very simple way to formulate your paragraphs. Start with your claim. What's the point of your paragraph? Then use evidence to support it. What does the research tell you about this? What can you insert into your paragraph to really make a good case for your argument? And then use reasoning. Reasoning is how you tie it all together. Why is it important? How does it all connect? But before we go too far down the road of what it means to provide evidence, we should talk about the right way to support your ideas. Plagiarism is the wrong way to support your ideas. Plagiarism is taking someone else's work or ideas and passing them off as your own. And some people just think, oh, that's cheating. It's not always that black and white. If you didn't make it up and you didn't pull it out of your own brain, then it's someone else's. 40% of undergrad college students and 40% of grad students admit to cheating on written assignments. And that can mean that they don't cite something properly, or it can mean what I discovered recently in one of my classes that I teach. My students submitted their paper through turnitin.com, and my student's paper was an exact copy of a paper from another student who submitted that same paper the semester before. That's downright stupid if your instructor uses a plagiarism detection program like Turnitin. You're never going to get away with that blatant kind of cheating. But really, what I see more often than that is a student who submits full sentences and paragraphs from a website without citing that information, without putting quotes around it. Many, many times we plagiarize by accident. We have to be careful not to do these things. So I have a friend who turned in parts of a paper in two different classes when she was in college. The same paper, two different classes, two different instructors. Somehow she got caught. She had no idea that there was something called self-plagiarism. She thought they were her own thoughts, so she had a right to use them. But she was wrong. She got in big trouble and she almost got expelled. So you should not even use your own written words for more than one class without making sure that it is acceptable. Now, if you're in high school, this may not be as big of a deal, but when you get into college, self-plagiarism is a thing. Be aware. Another way we plagiarize is by reading something and forgetting that we read it. So this happens when we forget to take good notes. So we read something and we think, wow, that's really good. And then we add it to our notes, maybe. And then we think about it some more, and maybe a few days go by. And then we sit down to write a paper, and that thought has now become ingrained in our process. Somewhere along the line, it just comes out perfectly in what we are writing. We've forgotten that it actually came from someone else. So, see how accidentally you read something, you thought about it, now you kind of almost think it's your own, and you put it into a paper and you forget that it isn't yours. That's plagiarism. Here's how we can avoid that accident. We can be very careful of cutting and pasting. Now, I like cutting and pasting from an article into my notes. So this is like what my notes would look like. But I would not ever copy and paste directly into my paper. Before any cutting and pasting into my notes, I always ensured that my source was listed. See how that's at the top there. That way I remembered no matter how many days went by between my note taking and my writing that I did not come up with those ideas myself. I also wrote out my reference page, or you might call it works cited or a bibliography, early. In fact, many times I would write my reference page out first, then included the full reference in my notes, just like I just showed you, just to make sure that I don't accidentally plagiarize. And I usually also included the citation too. This way, when I go to put this information into my own words, I can quickly cite it. Just to reiterate, these are my notes. The colors, remember, are my paragraphs. The references are what go into that last page of my written document, my reference page, my works cited page, my bibliography, whatever you call it. And the little Sing 2013 you see there, that's my citation. That's what goes into the body of my paper when I use ideas from these notes. So that brings me to paraphrasing versus quoting. You should paraphrase most of the time. It flows better. It shows that you've been able to take the information in, process it, and put it into your own words in just the right place in your paper. Paraphrase if the information you are presenting is unlikely to be questioned, which should be most of what you are presenting. Quoting throughout your paper can come across as choppy and also sends the message that you might have taken the easy way out. It's a lot easier to drop quotations all throughout your paper than it is to take it and paraphrase it. On the other hand, you should quote if you can't say it any better than how the author said it. If their words are just so profound or witty, and you believe that it just has a bigger impact if you quote it word for word, then you should. Also, if you are taking a very unique position that relies on your reader understanding exactly what another writer said about it, then maybe you can quote. Just be sure that when you're quoting, you use proper transitions and phrases leading up to and out of your quote so it flows into the rest of your paper. And also remember that if you use a quote, when you transition in and out of it, you're now providing context. Regardless of if you quote or paraphrase, you still need a cite, you need a citation. Remember that if you didn't make it up, it's plagiarism no matter how you put it in your paper. And if you don't include that parenthetical documentation, that's the parentheses, that citation is, if you don't include that, you're now saying this information is mine. I made it up. The citation is the key to showing that it isn't yours. And I should point out, the citation looks different if you use MLA, APA, Chicago, whatever one you use, your citation, your reference page, they always look different, just so you know. So this presentation has been all about critical thinking and research skills. How do they tie together and where does plagiarism come in? Well, it's all about being an educated, well-read student and understanding that as you become a critical thinker, you will question what you read and hear, and you will formulate a stance on issues by analyzing the facts. You will use the research and ideas you've gained from reading and watching videos to formulate a solid argument. In that process, you need to remember that the information is not yours. That is what academic integrity is all about. And it's smart to learn this now rather than when you get to college, because you will be many steps ahead of others if you already know how to do research, how to take notes, and how to properly use and cite evidence. So I didn't make any of this up. I made some of it up, but not all of it. And so here's my reference page, just like I just told you. I hope you enjoyed my presentation, and I really hope I taught you something today. Thank you so much.